All right. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill Quinn, and I am delighted to welcome attorney Peter Ticktin in with us this afternoon to discuss the status of the efforts to free Tina Peters from what many are recognizing as wrongful incarceration. So, Mr. Ticktin, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
You bet.
Yeah.
Thank you again for being with us, Mr. Ticktin. You know, in many cases, especially here in Georgia, we've had challenges getting attorneys to become involved in really any of the election-related matters. They seem to be reticent to become involved for one reason or another. Yet you seem to be very resolutely behind this effort to see that justice and ultimately freedom reaches Tina Peters. Tell us, if you would, just for a moment, how you decided to get involved.
Well, I was asked to join the team and to take on the role of lead counsel, which is what I ordinarily, that's the position I usually take in cases. And then the more I got to know Tina Peters and the more I looked at this case and saw how innocent she actually is and how all she was doing was exactly the thing that a person should do, I knew that it was a very important case, and I knew I could help it. So I joined it.
That's great. And I think
yeah.
Please continue.
Okay. Well, the thing is that what many people just don't realize, because it's just so hard to believe, but they don't realize that our election was actually rigged in 2020. And, you know, with half the nation being told by trusted voices on the media, not that they should be trusted, but that they are, that this was a big lie and so on and so forth, you know. So, but even for the people on our side, even for the people that realize that this actually happened, it's just so unbelievable that this could ever happen, that it kind of defies the ability to come to terms with it. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm in the Matrix movie and I'm looking around at table after table after table that have these living corpses that are on the tables, and I'm there and I'm just pulling the tubes out and I'm looking around and I'm wondering, how do I wake other people up? I try to wake them up and they don't seem to be wanting to wake up. So I'm not able to wake them up. But it is all coming out. But when I first got involved with this, that's the position where I really was, with very few people really understanding what had occurred. And then the more I delved into it, the more I realized that our nation, see, they didn't steal the election. They rigged the election. They didn't steal the election. They stole the United States of America. They stole our country. And it isn't just a matter of Democrats as opposed to Republicans. When I was younger, you know, it was sometimes very hard to tell them apart. There were moderate, mainly moderate politicians on each side, and you know, maybe with a little bit more of a spin that they want to do this, be a little bit more giving on one side than the other. But they were Americans. But we're not talking about Americans when it comes to the election theft. We're talking about Chinese. We're talking about Iranians. We're talking about Venezuelans.
Yeah.
And look at this. The first election that was stolen by machines was in 2004, August of 2004, when Hugo Chavez was facing a recall election in Venezuela. And that's when the Smartmatic machines were used to rig the vote, so that he ended up with 58% of the vote when he really should have lost by a large margin. And so, you know, and ultimately it was just a couple of years later that they started the exporting business. And we look at Venezuela, I'm not sure exactly where we are in terms of whether we're going to go in there or not go in there. You know, I haven't lived in the future yet, so I can't tell you yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if part of the reason that we're about to do such a thing is because not just because of the drugs. The drugs are reason enough, but it's not just the drugs. It's the exporting of fixed elections to 72 countries, including the United States. This is what they do. They're very, very good at it, and it's all around the world at this point.
That scale that you just mentioned, 72 countries having been impacted by what we're now learning here in the U.S. is difficult for many to grasp. I mean, that's a substantial portion of the countries around the world, and yet, for years, as you said, we've been told, "Oh no, everything was fine here. This is all the big lie or the big, the big fake," and it is challenging for people to grasp, and yet they do, thankfully, finally seem to be getting it. You've probably seen what's happened in Georgia in the last few weeks, and of course now this with Tina Peters that on an individual basis bears just bizarre characteristics of, those in power utilizing that power to squash truth, to squash information that should be available. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you, in the last 48 hours, your team submitted an urgent request for the appellate court to consider whether indeed, as I understand it, whether they indeed have jurisdiction to rule on the current appeal. So perhaps it makes sense. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about what this was about, what you hope to achieve with this latest set of filings.
Well, what is thank God we have President Trump. He is a godsend to our country, and thank God he as well that he didn't lose his life during the campaign. And
Yes.
I just hope that he stays safe now. But thank God that we've got him, because he knows what's going on. He understands exactly what's going on. He does not fool himself into thinking everything's going to be all right. He knows that unless he makes it so that everything's all right, it's not going to be all right. And so he issued a pardon, and that's something he has the power to do. And the Constitution basically provides that the president does have the power to pardon for offenses against the United States. And it was with my argument in mind that the president granted the pardon. But and you might have heard the argument that I raised in the beginning, which is the fact that we thought of the United States, those two words, the label of our country, the political entity, the United States of America. We look at the United States as that. But before the end of the Civil War, we were far more. At the time of the Civil War, there were 36 states in the United States. And a state is a nation. We could have been called the United Nations of America, or we could have been called the United Countries of America, or the United States of America. They all meant the same thing. And so if you think of us as though the Constitution said that the president, it says that the president can grant a pardon for offenses against, let's say, the United Countries. That's how they would have been seeing it, a bunch of countries that are united. And so very often these things were meant to be understood in that light. But in fact, there's other considerations that even make it more meaningful as to why it would apply to these particular offenses. And it's that you can't have, I mean, yes, we do have two different jurisdictions. A person could be prosecuted for a crime on the state level and also prosecuted for the crime on the federal level. There's two different sovereigns. When you have two different sovereigns, you each one of them have the right to bring on those something regarding their laws. So if you have a federal law and you also have a state law, those are two different kinds of charges. They're from two different places. So it may sound like double jeopardy is in play, that people can have double jeopardy, and yes, they can. So, we saw that with Rodney King, for instance, where at first Rodney King was prosecuted by the state of California, and that the jury decided that the police officers that beat Rodney King, that was on videotape, they had it, anybody could see it, that the police officers were not guilty. So the federal government then came in and said, well, we're going to try for this as well under our laws, and it was not double jeopardy. They were allowed to do it. However, here, the federal government, the way the federal law is written is very different than almost any other laws. Where the government basically, the federal law says that in the event that someone violates the election laws of a state, that's also a federal crime. So they're not making a new law. They're just allowing themselves to prosecute on the basis of the law that already exists. It's the same law.
Mm-hmm.
And so so there's other distinctions that are involved here, especially when you're in an area where it is an area that's occupied by the federal government, and the supremacy clause of the Constitution applies. Because if states are allowed to just mirror the laws of the federal government, for instance, about anything, then they would be in a position to strip the president of the right to pardon anybody if it was so that that a pardon power didn't apply also to the states. So at least in certain circumstances, it needs to apply to the states. And in history, it looks like it has. So, for instance, whether it's the Whiskey Rebellion, where George Washington pardoned people who committed not only federal offenses, but also state offenses, and the states respected that and didn't go after anybody for trespassing or for assaults or batteries or even arson. Okay, these are all state offenses, and those pardons were effective in terms of those state offenses as well. Unfortunately, we don't have much of a record for the pardons that preceded the 1980s, because there were fires. The first fire that destroyed all the pardons was in the War of 1812. In 1813, they burned down the White House, and there went the pardons and a lot of the paperwork. So and then in the 1980s, or 1979, there was another huge fire in Washington that also wiped out all these records, because they didn't have computers, they didn't have copy machines. Those papers were original and singular, so when they were destroyed, the records were destroyed. But I think we have to look back and see, what did the framers actually mean when they said that the president has the right to pardon for offenses against the United States.
Yeah. One of the things that people have noted is that it's almost intuitive to understand these were, at least in part, federal elections. Now, yes, there were people on the ballot that would have been local and state and so forth, but many of the positions that were being voted on were federal. And so literally by definition, I believe one of the things quoted in your documents is 52 U.S. 20701, which talks about preservation of records and retention.
Yeah.
And it specifically notes the officer of elections. So that would be, in this case,
Tina Peters
in Mesa County. And
yes.
So a great example of, yes, it's being implemented at a state level, but in fact, she's acting, and again, I'll use my own layman's understanding. She's acting as a representative of the laws put down by the federal government. Is that a reasonable
Yeah. It's a situation, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
Okay. Because here, if she followed the desires, not the laws of the state, and allowed her computer to be wiped out, then she's guilty of a crime under the federal laws. And if she obeyed the laws of the federal government, then the people in the state fished around to find ways of charging her with criminal offenses that she didn't actually commit. So, so here we were in a very difficult position. I mean, think about it. The president of the United States gave my client a pardon. Okay, I say my client, but believe me, we are a team that worked together with Patrick McSweeney, Bob Sinclair, John Case, and Stephanie Lampert, and myself. Anyway, we were issued a pardon for Tina Peters. So we want to go ahead and deal with that pardon. But at the same time, we really want to go ahead with the appeal because the judge didn't let her put on her defense that she had to do what she was doing because otherwise she'd be violating federal law. And that was the only way that she could do it. She needed to image the hard drive of the Dominion machines, which she did before. They then put on something they called a trusted build. And a trusted build is actually a term of art. Okay, if you're putting on a trusted build for a program onto a computer, what it means is it can be trusted not to wipe out the data. Okay, it just upgrades your program. Like when you get a new program on your iPhone and you or on your computer and you upgrade the program, it doesn't wipe out all your data. It only upgrades the program. That's a trusted build. So they called it a trusted build, but it wasn't. It should have been called, a trusted wipe, because that's what it did. It wiped the drive clean, and then it reinstalled the program on top of it. So when you do that, you can never get the original data back. It's gone forever. So unlike, what you see on forensic files or someplace where experts are able to get deleted materials, not once that's overwritten. Once it's overwritten, it's gone forever. So that's what they did. This is what Jenna Griswold, the Secretary of State, literally had done in 62 of the 64 counties. All the counties that had Dominion machines, she wiped out. She committed federal crimes. She is a criminal. Tina Peters is not a criminal. Like part of her, the things that she was charged with had to do with the expert that came in. So the expert that was used, a fellow named Conan, he couldn't use his right name. He couldn't use his birth name because he had already taken certain actions helping the government, which helped break up a cartel that was involved with human trafficking. And they were gunning for him. He was a wanted man. The cartels wanted to kill this man. So he had to use a different name. And she was not allowed to use that defense. She was not allowed to indicate that that's why she did what she did. And and also she couldn't indicate that you're allowed to. There was nothing wrong with it. First of all, this fella was not just an expert. He was an expert that was certified by the Department of Homeland Security to do exactly what he did. So with or without the clerk, he was authorized to do it. Secondly, all of a sudden there's a procedure where the Secretary of State tells you that you're not allowed to do things, you're not allowed to do it. She's not even in the equation. But she wasn't allowed to use these defenses, and the supremacy clause is also there. So when you're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, let's say, in order to follow federal law, you have to break state law. Guess what? You're allowed to. Any state law you need to break in order to make sure that, it doesn't mean, while you're at it, you can go rob a bank. But any state law that you need to break in order to obey a federal law is a complete defense. She wasn't allowed to use that defense.
That's right. As I recall, there were over 40 requests or motions that were denied for, for various aspects of evidence that could have helped her. Yes.
Yeah, 41. I think 41 motions were brought on this
Wow.
very issue. Yeah,
Wow.
and we had a judge who really it was, let's just say, there is a cabal. And this is part of what I started off explaining about people's reluctance to understand what is actually going on in the world. And it's so important to understand this at this point, because we're going to have midterms. And somewhere before the midterms, President Trump is going to announce that there are new rules for these elections. And he's going to probably indicate that it's an election emergency. I don't know for sure what President Trump's going to do or say, but I can tell you from my own personal knowledge, there is an election emergency. The voter rolls throughout the country are corrupted. There are imaginary people that are put into all of these. So, like, for instance, in your state or in your county, there could be 2 Bill Quinns, or maybe there's 4, maybe there's even 8. Okay, we don't know how many Bill Quinns there are, but there's only one real Bill Quinn. The other one, or the others, will have exactly the same driver's license number as you have. They will have your social security number. They will have your home address. They will have your phone number. They will have your date of birth, although sometimes the date of birth is varied. They will have, for sure, the one thing that's consistent with all of these is a different voter identification number. That's why not only can you vote, but your modified duplicate can also vote. Okay, but they can't actually go to the polls and vote because they're imaginary. They don't actually exist. But the computers can pull them up out of the archives, vote them, and put them back into the archives. And there are about 10 million or more of these throughout the country. 2 million in New York alone, probably about 1 million in Florida. And we don't know for each state how many there are, but we know that this is rampant throughout the United States. The voter rolls are corrupted and the machines are corrupted. There cannot be a fair election with those. And more information is now coming out that is making this very clear. So, this is something that no longer can we afford to have this as something that we can choose to not believe. We need to look at the facts and see that this really did happen. And for 4 years, our nation was stolen. And it was stolen by foreign actors, especially Venezuela, working, basically at the behest of China. And I know that Iran was in this loop as well. But you may wonder then, if that's true, how did Donald Trump get to win in 2024? And that's because there was certain actions that were taken where the computers that controlled the outcome, which were located in Belgrade, Serbia, were basically disabled. The hard drives were melted down. That was like 3 days before the election in 2024. And if it hadn't been for that, for sure, we'd have Kamala Harris would have won the election through the difference of the machines. As it is, she had the benefit of the ballot dumps and all of that, and that was too big to rig. But the machines are too big. There's no way, no matter what the results would be from real votes for Donald Trump, it would have been insurmountable, because the machines can make up whatever numbers that they need to make up.
Yeah. Many people called out right after the election. They said, where did 15 million, I think it was 15 million votes disappear to? Biden supposedly got 81 or whatever it was, and President Trump got somewhere in the 60s. And when they totaled them back up between Kamala Harris and Trump this time, 15 million net votes were somehow mysteriously gone from the process. And people said, how could that be? Did people not come out this time? And of course, what you're describing explains that. Those
It does.
were part and parcel of these, I guess we'll call them fictitious votes, fictitious registrations as well, and weren't in the process for that particular election.
Right.
Thankfully.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to God that if Maduro is taken out, that he's taken out alive, because it would certainly be helpful for him to admit his crimes.
That's right. That's right. If I could, you mentioned constitutional rights earlier, and one of the areas that's of concern, I would like to come back to the bigger picture in just a few minutes, but I want to make sure we don't forget the tactical purpose for our discussion today, and that is Tina. There's been news come out that talks about the conditions, especially in the prisons in general, potentially in Colorado, and especially in La Vista, where she is currently being held, and the fact that they may be additionally violating her Eighth Amendment rights by putting her in a position where even her health could be at risk based on, I understand there's evidence of black mold in the environment, which would, of course, be terrible for anybody with any kind of lung issues or really even healthy people. In addition to temperature issues and other things, and those would seem to be reason enough to ask for or demand, in fact, that she be removed from that environment and placed under different custody. Is that something that that seems to be moving forward, or is that just one more denial area that they've come to?
It's another denial area that they've come to, but in fact, these things are true. She has an incessant cough that just will not go away. While she was in solitary, the cough did stop, or almost stop. But now that she's back in the unit that she was in, they couldn't keep her for more than 15 days in solitary because it was protective custody, is what their excuse was. Mm. But that only can last for 15 days. And then they put her back in the same unit, but not the same cell, because, there's been publicity about the fact it was only 21 square feet. So now they put her back in a cell that's slightly larger. The first one was a place that the washing machine and dryer used to be. Now she's in one that used to be a storage closet and made into a cell.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I know. It's a little bit larger, though. And so she and her cellmate are now in that location, but still it's hell.
We heard something that she alluded to in a note over Christmas, that even the other inmates, albeit some were probably not very supportive of her initially, but I believe I heard when she was released from solitary and they brought her through the population back to her other, I guess her new cell, many people were cheering for her or calling out to her in support, which suggests to me that people even in the prison are getting this to some extent. They're realizing the price that's being paid to try to get the truth out.
Yeah. And when you did mention a little earlier, you said, well, the main topic is Tina Peters, but the main topic is Tina Peters and the election, because really this is why she's an American hero. It's not because she's just a person who was wrongfully incarcerated. It's because she's wrongfully incarcerated for doing what was necessary to save our country. And it's those clerks that are able to write. I mean, out of 62 clerks, other ones had also imaged their computers. But when push came to shove, when people like Jana Griswold and Weiser, they demanded that they get the copies that they made or images they made get turned over. Everyone else basically gave them up. But here's Tina Peters stuck to her guns, and she was not going to do what was wrong for America. And, so you've got to look at what she did, not just in light of the fact that she did what she did, but she did it in a dangerous time. She did it in a place where there were plenty of people, the whole Dominion machine apparatus, together with all the people that are on the hook with them, all needed to cover up the election. I mean, let me ask you this, and this is a keen, important question, because this is all about Tina Peters. And the question is, why is the person who was securing the evidence and preserving the evidence, meaning keeping a way of knowing what the truth is, why is she behind bars, and the people who erase the evidence, why are they the ones that are out putting her behind bars? I mean, look at the people who are now refusing to release her. You got Governor Polis. He's refusing to release her. Why? Why? Because who was he? How did he get in his office? He didn't just walk in. He got elected. He got elected in a system that is rigged. We've got Weiser, the Attorney General. Why is he so strongly against letting the 70-year-old woman out of prison when there's so many things wrong with it? Why is he so strong against it? He's in office. How did he get in office? Through a rigged election. And then we have the Secretary of State, another one. So we got criminals in power. We got criminal, and that's why we call Colorado a captured state. Because the people aren't, there are a lot of people that believe a lot of things in Colorado. And there's a lot of people who believe that, there's something wrong with Tina Peters because of all that they're being fed, because that all emanates from the top. You don't ever have people that take over a government improperly or illegally, the way this was done, that are kind to their people that they've taken over from. It usually ends up being brutal. And one thing that they really insist on is that nobody reveal the truth. And by giving Tina Peters 9 years in prison, that really sets the precedent. That tells every clerk, because they're not just looking about the clerk for the clerks in Colorado. Dominion is countrywide. And Dominion wants the clerks throughout the country to be afraid to preserve the truth. And we have another clerk up in Michigan who's being prosecuted. We got Stephanie Lambert, an attorney for that clerk, who's also being prosecuted. They want to put us in prison because we want to preserve the truth of their crimes.
I think one of the notable quotes right after Tina was sentenced was that this would have, I think somebody said, a chilling effect on other clerks who might consider some of the same actions. And that speaks to exactly what you said. This is about making people scared to stand up for what they know to be true, it would seem, yes.
Yeah, this is Rubenstein that said that in the sentencing argument, where he was basically saying that it has a cooling effect, admitting basically that's what was being done. But he didn't realize what he was saying in that regard, because he thought everybody was on board, understanding that Tina Peters did something so terrible, as though, we got to keep clerks from bringing people in to image their computers if they have a reason to use a different name. I mean, the whole thing is bizarre. That's not where the cooling effect is. The cooling effect is, as a clerk, don't you dare do what's right. Don't you dare follow the law that's laid out by the federal government. Don't you dare preserve the evidence of the fraud that was committed. And I will tell you that not only did this fellow image the computer, the Dominion hard drive, before Jennifer Griswold came in and installed, I mean, she had a fellow do it, installed the trusted build. But they took another image after. And I think it was 29,000 files were completely obliterated, gone, never be seen again. These are all files involving the election.
Yeah. I think people have referred to what she's discovered in that process as something of a Rosetta Stone for the way that this may have been committed, probably not just in Mesa County, obviously, but across Colorado, across many states. Maybe they have, some people have speculated they may have, several, maybe many different ways of orchestrating these changes to end up with the counts and the results that they, whoever the mystery they is, wishes. And
Yeah.
so
You wait and see. We went after this next election. I've had experts that an expert who was involved with the voter rolls and discovering these modified duplicates and actually discovering algorithms that can tell you where they are. You can use the algorithm to find the duplicates. But he estimates that the Democrats in the House of Representatives could easily be reduced to half if we have a fair election. And, I mean, think about it for a second. You hear the different polls and the different, who likes Trump, how many people like him. We know they lie about these things too.
mm-hmm.
So where do you find the truth? And I think you find the truth if you look for the indirect answers. So to give you what I'm talking about, I mean, think back about the election. We had an election, then shortly after the election, and what was it, like 74 million next to 78 million, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you could almost say is kind of almost close to half and half. But nothing happened after the election that would cause somebody to go from Democrat to Republican. If they hated Donald Trump, they didn't stop hating Donald Trump because he got sworn in. But you had 2.5 months. You had, from the beginning of November through the middle of January 20th, where nothing happened. Right? Kamala disappeared. She and Waltz made an occasional cameo here and there, but they were gone. They had their heads under some pillow someplace. and Joe Biden, you may remember, he went to the beach. There was nothing happening for 2.5 months. There was no leadership. It was like, well, we lost the election. I guess we're done. And they just gave up and they stopped anything. So it's not a time when people were moving, changing parties, forgiving Donald Trump, starting to love him. That wasn't happening. And then he was sworn in, and over the next 6 weeks, nothing really seemed to happen. At that time, that would cause any kind of a surge where they would all of a sudden switch over and like Donald Trump. But at that point, there was the State of the Union address. And after the State of the Union address, there was a poll that was done by a number of different agencies or, companies. And they wanted to determine, how many people approved the speech versus how many people disapproved. Well, let me tell you something. If you suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, it doesn't matter what he says. You're not going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you don't like Donald Trump, you're not going to approve of his speech. And if you don't believe me, look at the members of Congress, how they wouldn't even listen. The Democrats, they wouldn't even pay attention to his speech. They hated it. CNN was the worst result. 69% approved of Donald Trump's speech. And it went all the way to 76% of the people approved of his speech. So those are the real numbers. If you want to know what the silent majority has and where we are, think in terms of in excess of 70%. And if you want to know where the loud minority is, think of terms of less than 30%. That's the difference. That's the dichotomy in this case, in this country. We are the majority. We are easily the majority. And yet we're being led so much, and our country was stolen, as I said, for 4 years by foreign interests that took over. And if you don't think so, I mean, when did it ever become a good idea to open up the southern border? I mean, there's so many different things we can think about that they were doing that was so wrong and designed to actually harm our country. I mean, to feminize our armed force, nothing's wrong with feminizing, but really, do you really want your armed forces to be woke? You want DEI to be the way we run our armed forces? This is not a good idea. It's a great idea if we want to have a military that can't win.
Yeah, do you want a military whose leaders force their infantry to accept certain medications that they might otherwise choose not to take, yet they forced it? I mean, there's so many questions in the military realm about how things were run and what choices were made. None of it makes any sense.
That's a whole other issue in terms of imposing the jab on the military. I understand that the death rate is way up in our military, above what was even a couple of years ago. I heard 1,100%, which would be 11 times the rate of demise. So I mean, if this is real and this is happening, but that's a whole other program we can do.
Yes.
on what's going on with that and why, and what is that all about. But these people want to destroy America. Look, America is 4% of the population of the world, and yet we consume 25% of all the whatever's produced in the world. We've invented by far the vast majority of inventions that need to be invented. Being free doesn't just mean that you can say what you want, but being able to say what you want to say, having the freedom of speech, means you have the freedom of thought, because words are just labels for concepts. I mentioned to you now, a dove. You're picturing a white bird in your head. I turned it into a blue dove. I just did that by just saying two labels: blue, which means that color, and a dove, which means that kind of a bird. And all of a sudden, you've got that in your head. You've got the concept conveyed to you because I gave you the labels. That's what speech is. And if we're not allowed to say the word dove and we're not allowed to say the word blue, we're never going to be able to invent a new animation of a cartoon that has a blue dove in it. And so, because we're a nation that's free and free to think, because we're free to speak, we have come up with more and more inventions. We've been able to follow, seek the American dream because of this. And they want to take this away. I mean, seriously, people like Prince Harry and the Aspen Institute, where they want to dictate what is permitted and not permitted, is again another whole issue that needs to be examined, and we could do another program on those. But this is about Tina Peters, and the fact is that she saved the evidence that does help to prove how the machines actually work. Now, my understanding is that there were experts that examined what Tina Peters had. They put it together with the image of that hard drive together with tabulators, and they're able to show that no matter what they put into those machines, apparently those experts put 40,000 ballots into the machines, these tabulators. And it didn't matter which order they were or which numbers of ballots were going in, all for Biden, all for Trump. Every time they came out, 2 for Trump, 4 for Biden, 2 for Trump, 4 for Biden. They all came out every time with fictitious numbers. So, we know the machines cannot be trusted. And if this is the one pivotal issue that we have. I mean, there's so many things. Getting all the people that have been weaponized out of prison is so important. Especially Tina Peters. I mean, for me, it's more important than just about anything on the planet. But there's one thing, and that's important. But there's one thing that's pivotal, and the one thing that's pivotal means we either keep America or we lose America. That's what I mean by pivotal. And that one thing that's pivotal is that we need to have an emergency order that basically makes every state use paper ballots for the election in 2026. Because I can guarantee you, if the machines are involved, the machines will dictate the results, and they won't be fair, they won't be right, and it won't be good. And something else that I think people need to understand, we can look at misery, and we can understand it theoretically. I mean, what child doesn't picture their mother dying or their father dying? I mean, it's part of what we go through. Just any normal child thinks about it at some point. They hear about a friend of theirs whose parents died or whatever. They think about their own parents dying, but they don't feel it. And then, God forbid, but they experience at a young age or an older age, doesn't matter, you experience the death of your parents or one of your parents. And that's when you understand it. The misery that we have when harm befalls us is real, it's palatable, it hurts. It's not what we imagine. And if we were ever to turn into a communist state, if we were to ever turn into one where we lose our freedoms, at that point, you're going to understand the misery of it. But for those that think, oh, well, let's give this a try, let me tell you, no, it's as permanent as death. And it will not come back to being the free country that we have, this miracle that we have of the United States. And these people who think that they can take over our elections and use our machines, that is the highest form of treason. They need to, at very least, be incarcerated for the rest of their lives. And when I say the very least, I would say there's another option as well, because that is treason. You can't just fix the elections and alter the results and take over our country and think that that's okay.
No.
It's a crime. It's the highest of crimes.
I was going to say it's the highest of crimes, isn't it? It is a challenging time, and what we may indeed probably will have to face is going to be challenging in and of itself, it sounds like, for people to come to grips with. But it does indeed have to be recognized, and people have to understand what it is that has been done to us and what needs to be done to get us back onto a proper footing, it sounds like. As we go forward, I wanted to make sure folks knew how to continue to follow you and to follow Tina, and then ask for some guidance in terms of actions over the coming days. So here is, I believe that, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, the Court of Appeals in Colorado should be applauded. They could have caused delays, they could have slowed things down, but they're decent and they're honest, because what they're doing is they made it when they saw the motion that we filed, they gave us a scheduling order that requires the state to respond to our motion by the 5th of January. And then we've got a few days to respond to that. So we're on a tight leash to be able to get these things done. But they did that because our oral argument that's scheduled already is scheduled for the 14th of January. And they didn't want to change the schedule. They didn't want to cause delay. They did the right thing. They made a schedule that fits it, and we're going to go forward with that and argue our appeal. We anticipate we were going to win the appeal one way or the other, but now we also need to make sure that we support that pardon that the president was gracious enough and good enough to give to us.
Right. Plus, there's a timing component because of the health issues we talked about a few minutes ago. So that's wonderful news that the appellate court has taken action already. That's great. And anticipatory, hopefully.
Yeah, no, they did a wonderful thing, and we just need to make sure we each keep to that schedule, and
Well,
then
great.
the arguing it on the 14th. I think John Case. I wanted John to be the one to argue the case because he's very bright, he's very good, and he has the historical knowledge for having been in the case as long as he has, to be the best one to argue.
Great. Well, this is Tina Peters. I guess it's the team's account on X. Yes. So there's news that shows up here that will help people stay up to speed. Here is your own X account so people can follow. And I know you're posting regularly on things that are going on and things of ancillary interest that are important, just like many of the things we kind of talked about today. Some have called for continued communications to the White House to ask for the kinds of actions I think that you're suggesting may need to be taken. How do you feel about that? Does that make sense to continue to reinforce politely and encourage the president and his team to take the steps necessary?
Well, you see, this is where I'm a little bit extreme, okay? Because I think that what's going on here, the federal government has every right to extract Tina Peters from prison. Because why is she in prison? She's in prison for preserving evidence following federal law, which is supreme over the state law.
Yep.
And this is the state's way of interfering with the American elections, the federal elections, by imprisoning people, charging them in an area that they don't have the supremacy, they don't have the right to do it, and it's all by pretext. The president has the right. And now that, people think he lost the case that was recently decided by the Supreme Court, but what the Supreme Court basically was saying in terms of Illinois versus Donald Trump, what they were basically saying is, no, you cannot bring out the National Guard before you use up your other regular forces. In other words, you got to send in the Army or the Marines or the Navy. You've got to send in your regular forces in order to then use the National Guard. It was not an order that said you can't use the National Guard or any armed forces to clear up this kind of a problem. He's got the right now to do that, but not with the National Guard. So that was a big win. And I hope that when he does send in the Marines to Illinois, if he does, that he's sent a platoon in to get Tina Peters out of the jail in La Vista prison.
Wow.
There's no reason he can't do that. And look, I gotta tell you, look, I don't know that you realize this, but I think you do. But I've known Donald Trump since we were 15 years old. At New York Military Academy, and we were very close, lived together in our 17th year as seniors together at New York Military Academy. He's a wonderful human being, a wonderful person. But even back then, it's very hard to say no to Donald Trump. Not because he was a tough guy, but because he was such a good person that you just never wanted to disappoint him. And because other captains would do things that he would never. He was just had everybody's back, didn't care who you were. Anyway, Donald Trump now is of such stature, and leaders of foreign countries that don't easily say no to Donald Trump. Nobody says no to Donald Trump. And now you got this pipsqueak of a guy. He and his husband, this governor of Colorado, who thinks that he can stand up to and say no to Donald Trump. Now, I don't think that some of the economic things that are occurring in Colorado, where the federal government are, basically cutting back on certain things, I don't know whether that's related or not. I would think that it's not, but I don't know. But if I were the governor of Colorado, I would certainly think twice before I were to say no to Donald Trump. We all need to understand our place on earth and our societies. We need to know who we are and where real power is. We don't want a president of the United States that doesn't have real power. We don't want a governor of a state that be able to stand up to a president of the United States and think that he's more powerful. The fact of the matter is that all these moves have their consequences. And so this pipsqueak of a governor needs to basically get real. And if he has two brain cells that work that he could rub together somehow, hopefully those two cells will come up with an idea of maybe pardoning Tina Peters on his own, saying enough is enough. We're spending too much time, too much money, too much energy on this one person. We have a whole state to run, and that state is being run so poorly, as are all woke states, and all these I'd call it democratic, but it's not really Democrats anymore. It's something far different.
Yes. Well, we very much appreciate you being with us today. Thank you for being as candid and as open as you've been. And as you say, I think we've got several other conversations to have over time as things continue to mature, Mr. Ticktin. So thank you again for being here. We are always available if need comes to communicate things on a tactical basis, and we appreciate your time
It's really my pleasure
today, sir.
It's my pleasure. I guess it's too late to wish you a Merry Christmas, but I hope your Christmas was merry.
I appreciate that, and I hope that the season that we're in will continue to go. We're past the winter solstice, so things are getting lighter every day, and I hope that will continue.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.